Well, shalom and welcome everyone to another Ask Me Anything monthly session with researcher and author Gary Wayne. This is your host, Lisa George. We've received a bunch of questions during the live chat last month that Gary will be answering today. And if you have any questions for him to answer today, please put them in all caps so that I can see them in the live stream chat here on YouTube. And I will take note of them here. Thank you so much for our moderators for helping us out. We're hoping that they make their way here soon, Tammy and Sherry, and we just appreciate all of you in the chat joining in and keeping the chat so friendly for us today. Brother Gary, are you here today?
I am, and so happy to be back with you guys again tonight, and very much looking forward to the questions. And yeah, it's another show. Hard to believe, but another month has gone by. It's crazy, and the summer is coming to an end.
Yes, it went so fast. I can't believe it's September already. I'm still in shock, and then pretty soon it'll be October, right? All right, so Brother Gary, do you have any updates? And you could please share your website, how to order your new book, which is awesome. I'm still working on it, by the way. It's taken me a lot longer than the first one because I'm taking my time, and I'm extremely impressed. I am on the chapter about Gilgal. So I'm a little more than halfway through, and I actually have some questions for you after you answer everybody else's questions because it's just such a deep dive. I would really encourage everyone, if you have not purchased either one of Gary's books, get the first one. You could actually get the second one, I think, in my opinion, without reading the first one. But the first one is very helpful because it gives you like this amazing, super comprehensive background on why things are the way they are in the world today and prophecy. There's all kinds of stuff about secret societies. It's just awesome. And then the second one is even just more mind-blowing because if you know your Bible, like, I mean, I was raised in the church, and so I knew all these scriptures, but to have it all put together this way and figure out who all of these Nephilim tribes are and where they came from and what are all these wars about in the Bible. Sometimes I'd actually skip that part because I just thought it was boring, but not anymore. Thanks to you, Gary.
Well, thank you, and yeah, it just sort of brings that whole Old Testament to life in a way that I don't think's been presented before, and I think it's should be recommended to people to read because you can't really have the Old Testament without the New Testament or vice versa. So it's important to understand the Old Testament. It's just not taught well enough or often enough in the churches today. And if you like all of the information and the stories and all of the interesting details that come to life that you're never going to hear in the church for the most part, then you're really going to like the prophecy side as well, because again, churches aren't teaching much on prophecy. And it's one of my principles that I like to talk about is if you want to totally understand the full context of end-time prophecy, you have to understand prehistory and the history of Israel, because that's where all of the allegory and the context comes from for end-time prophecy, and particularly the book of Revelation. So, yeah, glad you're enjoying the book. My website is the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, you can contact me go to contact the author and ask me a question or ask for some information. If I have a document, I send those out at no charge. I'm still struggling to catch up, so I'm still running. I'm about 3 months behind on emails, but my schedule is starting to lighten up in terms of the other things I've been doing. So I'll get that wait list down, and be assured I will get back to you because I return the emails in order. So be patient with me, but I will give you the information. And if you want a generous excerpt and table of contents as to book 1 or book 2, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 chapters of book 2. And I think the table of contents will grab your interest, and the excerpt will as well. And the amazing thing is, I think, is that that's just a small drop of what's in the chapter and what's in the book. So you'll know whether it's the right book for you. If you wanted to get a signed copy, you can go to the Buy Now page and buy book 1 or book 2. If you wanted to buy one of each, I'm hoping to have my website altered again and updated with a couple of things I'll talk about in a minute to be able to mix and match different quantities between the two books in the fall. I'm en route now back to Vancouver from my cottage, so I'm hoping to get that done over the next month. So if you wanted to buy one of each, just buy 2 of one of the books. Send me an email through Contact the Author or Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. Again, the number 6, so Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com, and say you want one of each. If you wanted to buy 6 and you wanted 4 and 2, just tell me who you want them made out to and how that split is done, and I'll look after that, and you'll get the discounts for that for the quantity purchase. I also have an update for Audible for book 1. It has been released a couple of weeks ago, and it's already ranking quite well in a couple of areas, and very pleased with the first 2 weeks of sales. I got an update on that, so that's been nice to see, and it's available through Amazon ACX, who distributes to Amazon Audible, and also to iTunes. If you wanted to not support Amazon but wanted to get it from somebody else, that's how you get it, is through iTunes or through Amazon Audible. So that's up and running, and book 2 is being produced currently and with the same orator. So if hopefully you like the first one, and book 2 is a larger challenge in my opinion, than book 1, because of all the different Greek words and all the different Hebrew words, all the different historical words and names and things like that. And so I opted to go with the same reader because he's at least familiar with book 1 and did a very good job on that, and is also very familiar with Apocrypha and ancient writings. So hopefully that will be something that people will look forward to downloading. I know I've gotten just so many emails, questions, and comments over the years, just wishing it would be available in Audible. So it is now available, book 1, and book 2 will be out before Christmas. I'm hoping by the end of October.
Awesome. It's so important to have a good reader that's especially not going to butcher the Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic names, right? Well, I've heard that happen before with others.
Yeah. Well, and the other issue is whether or not it's, Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek. There are different pronunciations used around the world for the same names and places and things, and so you'll never get 100% agreement, but consistency is important. And so even with Mel reading it, there's going to be some things in there in book 1 that I would pronounce differently, but if you were to micromanage everything, because there's so many options that he could select to pronounce, it'd take forever to get a check on every one, and then to do the changes would take forever. So, and then the project would blow up. So I'm fine with all of the pronunciations that he's done. There's a couple interesting ones in there, but I'm fine with it.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about your second book too. I noticed a little bit maybe in the first book, but especially in the second book, where you actually write out the pronunciation of the difficult words in like the English type, kind of a transliteration, but like the pronunciation in English in italics, right? I noticed that in your second book.
I do, and I also, I think I provide some of that in the footnotes as well for some of that. So. Yeah. Because again, you're just guessing, and you're not sure where to put the syllable accent and all the other things that you can do on multiple syllable words for for pronunciation. So, and it's a guide, because again, somebody else will pronounce it differently, and don't ever let anybody say you're pronouncing it wrong, because there's just so many different ways to do it. Just whatever you're comfortable with, get it out. Like Melchizedek would be one that you could pronounce about, 15 different ways, and including probably how it should be pronounced, which I know it's not, but it's a compound word, so it should be like Melchizedek, right? It's not how we run it together if you understand it as a compound word, but understand running it together, and of course you get a different pronunciation, but that's just a sample of how many issues you can get in on pronouncing older names and older words.
Yeah, and I noticed too that the chapter I just finished reading about Gilgal and Goliath, it makes sense because Goliath, if you know, Goliath is a Hebrew word or Ugaritic word or whatever you want to call it, it would have been Geliot or something like not with a th at the end. Do you agree with that?
Depending on which language you're taking it back to as a root and or transliteration. So it's a word that shows up in Sumerian and Mesopotamian language. It's in Old Semitic, and but its root tends to be a little bit more into the Greek version. And so when you're into the G's, as I explained early on in the book, in the Greek language, the G can be pronounced, sort of hard as we understand it, but it also, if you have a different vowel, so if it's got like an A behind the G, it's going to be the hard G sound. But if you get an I or an E, for example, that's going to turn that G to a Y. So when you're looking at how names are pronounced throughout the Middle East, and it's like, the tribe of Danu and Datanu and Titan and the Dan, they're all the same word. They're just pronounced a little bit differently in the different languages. But that's how you start to connect Golgotha with Goliath, is that Goliath is part of the Philistines who came from Crete, which would be using Greek and Indo-Aryan pronunciations in its original format that would change that to a Y sound that we would normally spell with a G, but it doesn't show up that way into Hebrew. So that's part of how you connect Golgotha and Goliath together, and David burying the skull at Jerusalem.
Oh, yes.
Right? It's just all interconnected, but it's a lot of things to pull together to sort of get there.
Yeah, and fulfilling prophecy right there for the prophecy from the garden is right there. It's just it's amazing when you know these details of how much more it makes sense. I was wondering why would David carry the head like all the way to Jerusalem like to show off? I mean, but he had a very particular place he was burying that head.
He was, whether or not he knew it was going to be important for his descendant, which ultimately he may not have known, but David knew a lot of things. Obviously, he was obviously had the ear of God, but it was also to show to the Jebusites, I think, and I cover this off a little bit later in the book. He was showing to the Jebusites Goliath's head, and he's saying to them is, I'm going to bury the skull here, and I'm coming for you once I'm king. And that's the first thing he does as king.
Oh, wow.
He takes Jerusalem from the
Wow, I
Jebusites.
didn't realize that. I didn't make that connection. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, so I think there's many things, and that's the beautiful thing about the Bible is that it has so many layers in terms of how it connects into prophecy and history, right? So
yes. Oh, yeah. And it always, if you ever have questions about a certain verse in the Bible, it seems like it'll answer itself if you do more research later on in the book. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't contradict itself, which I think is so cool.
no, it never does. People say it does, or the critics like to say it does, but it does not. And I get a lot of emails where people will come and say, hey, I can't figure out why there's two different translations in the, you've got like in the book of books of Israel and the books of Judah, the historical accounts, and there'll be a version in each. And one will be translated slightly different than the other, and that's how can that be? And so I'll dig into the Hebrew for them and show they're not really different in Hebrew. It's just how the translator interpreted it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that conversation, Gary. I was so excited to continue reading the book, but I think we better get into the questions here. Again, if you have questions for Gary, He might be able to answer some of them today, but these would be more likely for next month. So please put them in the chat in all caps so I can see them. I've been grabbing your questions here. We've got a bunch of people asking already, and we'll start out with the questions that were submitted last time, starting out with number 1 from David Polachek. What inspiration did the royal families have when having the scriptures translated to English? The common people couldn't read. Was it to swear oaths?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Is if you buy into the concept that I talk about, that the royals are the offspring descendants of the
Yes.
Rephaim and the Nephilim, and that they received their divine authority from a specific council of gods and a specific celestial mafia godfather who would have, started that bloodline, both before and after the flood. Then what interest do they have in translating the Bible into English? And why would they have much interest in it at all? Other than to manipulate it and or to control their subjects or humans. And so they did have an agenda for it and a reason for it. But it also, we have to keep in mind, there's a lot of history that had passed before you have the Bible translated into the KJV by the translators and then overseen by Bacon, and a language that was developed for a specific agenda that's associated in a larger sort of context for creating the Commonwealth of the mighty Prince James as an Antichrist type bloodline as they look at themselves, and that they needed a language of the world for the Babel language to bring about the new Babel. And so the Commonwealth comes about through the visions of, in part, of Bacon and of King James. And English is going to be that Babel language for him, if he was that narcissistic. And I don't know that he thought he was going to be king over the world at that time, or for his bloodlines. So the Bible was a significant cause, not only to lay down future foundation stones for the coming of the universal religion and the world government and the Antichrist, but also it was solving some issues within the kingdom. You have to remember he was King of Scotland, and after Queen Elizabeth dies, he inherits the throne. And so you've got many different Christian sects not getting along. You have the Catholics, you have the Quakers, you have the Pilgrims, you have the Presbyterians, and on and on and on. And they're all sort of at each other's throats, so to speak, in terms of trying to get supremacy and dominance for being, let's say, positioning for the state-sponsored religion. And so what the Bible does, number one, is it creates a Bible for the elite that they can all read from the same Bible. So it unites the elite. Downstream, and because it's going to be read to the citizens, not in the Roman Church, because they're still going to be reading Latin at this point in time, right? But for the Protestants, it's going to be for the common folk, but only selectively, because the general tradition, and sort of comes out of the Roman churches, is they give you the verses and they tell you not to read the rest of the Bible. Essentially, you take the advice from us and we'll tell you what it means. So again, probably as much to control the people as well. But oaths is also a significant part. And just as you saw King Charles III sworn in on this oath of inheritance with the divine right to rule, which was made famous by the mighty Prince James, they have an oath-based belief system. and they have implemented an oath-based legal system on the whole world. And so this was in part to work in conjunction for their future plans and for where they were at that point in time. And so why would they need a Bible that they would swear an oath on? And that's essentially what they started to do, was they used the KJV to swear oaths to be initiated and taken, and oaths being taken within the secret societies and mystical religions.
Wow.
And so you can get a initiate's Bible today, and it looks exactly like the KJV except for the additional decoration and the pages that they set in front, where they give some explanations and they have particular passages set down there for the initiates to study, but you get some of their sort of history into that. So I suppose they could have sworn on almost anything, but they thought that they wanted this because they adopt some of the Bible into their belief system and into their history. So I thought maybe I would just talk a little bit about this. And a lot of this information comes from the preface of the Initiate's Masonic Bible. And so there's something that they had that was a oral tradition of their history that came down. And so that was called the Polychronicon, and the old charges. And so they were starting to transition this Polychronicon from an oral tradition and into a written tradition. And the Bible fits in as a piece of the jigsaw puzzle into their history. And so Freemasons wanted something to swear oaths on, and they thought this would be a good way to include and teach without people understanding what they're doing with the Bible, and they would have something to swear their oaths on. So when we look at Freemasons, they swear their oaths on this Bible that was introduced, and their loyalties to their gods and the loyalties to their secret societies and to their mystical religion upon the Bible as a legal instrument that's bound. And as the written successor, and in doing so, that is the successor to the oath sworn on the oral traditions, but now they have something that they're actually using in the ritual. So the Bible then was placed on their altars there to be sworn in any of the rituals and things that they were doing. And the lodges used the Bible as a literature of religion, and not necessarily as the gospel. And so, but what it does do is provide the legal book, as I say, for their to give sanctions to their obligations or to their oaths. And so it's a big part of their belief system in terms of having that, and to use it as, we're not non-Christians, we're actually Christians, except that they call themselves Gnostic Christians, or some sort of attachment that they use on that. And so it's not that they dismiss Jesus, they just don't accept him as the Word of God or the Son of God or the Redeemer or the Messiah. They accept him as one of the teachers of righteousness, one of the ones sent on the way, and that he didn't die on the cross, and that he produced children. So that's, but I've covered that off in a lot of other shows. And the Bible is also at the same time to them represents each of the world Bibles, that they would have that as part of their bigger sort of jigsaw puzzle and history that all makes up that religion. And so they look at it as those separate world Bibles, as the Qur'an would be one, the Vasta would be another, the Vedas would be another, for example. And it's a conflation of all of the religions, because they look at their religion as the ancient religion that was created before the flood, and it was the Enochian mysticism, and the same religion passed on to Babel, and Enoch, son of Cain, not Enoch, son of Jared. So when we look at this Polychronicon, they look at taking some pieces of the Bible that fits perfectly with their history in their Polychronicon, and they adopt that into it, but then they discard other things. So here would be a quote as to out of the secret societies in terms of how they would frame that. It says, so many of the biblical elements in the ritual are not found in the Bible itself. So it's talking about one of those rituals of that larger Polychronicon and history that I was talking about. The Bible elements came into the craft, not as history or theology, but as data to show that the great architecture had been known and practiced by the ancients, among whom the patriarchs, prophets, and kings of the Old Testament lived amongst. And another quote, and I won't quote forever on this, just to give a context as to how important this Bible was and their oath-based system and the legal system that they set up around the world accordingly with oaths. It says the real Bible of the operative lodges of the Middle Ages was a copy of the old charges. They are the Rosetta Stone by the means of which the scholars are enabled to decipher the history of the fraternity, about which was little known until the 19th century. So again, that's the real Bible, and then they pick and choose like a smorgasbord for what they want to take out of it or change. And they look at the Bible not literally, they look at it interpretive, and you have to be an adept to understand the Bible. So the interpretive approach is the polytheist approach, and that's why people should be very, very concerned when people are reinventing what the Bible says and using an interpretive approach. It should be a red flag. That's not a different way that some Christian scholars should teach the Bible. It is subverting the Bible and reinventing it so it fits into polytheism. And so that's, I would call that more of a virus within Christianity than another possible way of understanding the Bible. Because when you're in the interpretive approach and you don't have this master list of secret definitions, it can make people can make it mean anything that they want it to mean. And so before the Bible came into common use, as members and officers in the fraternity guild, another quote, or society, were required by law to take an oath. And in many instances, the form of the oath was embodied in the charter, and in a bureau of sufficient size and collection of oaths was kept in an official book. In the early Masonic lodges, candidates and affiliating members received oaths from the old charges, which was in that oral tradition, a copy of which served as a legal instrument. But after the Bible came to be used to sanction oaths for public office and in courts, it similarly came to replace the old charges for that purpose in the lodges. That's a quote right out of the Initiate's Bible. So just to give people a feel that they needed it for those purposes, and they still use that today. Now, not all the lodges have the KJV version. Some of them have other translations, but it's been converted. And that is not the Bible that the adepts have. The one the adepts have is a much larger one, not the full Polychronicon, but a much larger one. And it really reinvents a lot of the scripture. And it's really hard to get copies of those ones. They're like, hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you can get one. Yeah. So, and same with the Polychronicon. It's just an incredible amount of money to try and get the written version of that.
Have you ever seen either one of those, like in person, a Polychronicon or the Adept's Bible?
I've seen pieces of it. I have a link for the Polychronicon, and it's part of it. And I thought, well, was a little bit underwhelming. And then I learned that, that was interesting, but underwhelming. And then I learned not all the Polychronicons available for public view. And just like what I had probably wasn't either. So, and just like I've not actually put my hands on an adept Bible. And I've not decided to buy one, but I've seen them, looking on the internet and places like that. I've seen some people go through them, but I don't have one, so I can't verify that. But I was told by adepts that yes, they have their own Bible, and they say. I was even told, I only was told this once, so that the higher you go, you either receive multiple ones that have additions, or you just continually get a larger one as you go up. So again, even within the hierarchy, they don't get all of it until you really get into the bloodline. So you're going to be probably beyond Rosicrucians before you start to see the real Bible that they have that includes everything.
Wow, and that my mind is just racing, going, when you mentioned that they use this particular Bible to swear oaths and in their secret societies and their rituals, and I automatically think about when you go to court, you just put your right hand on the Bible, swear, you tell the truth, there's that, and then of course, when at the presidential inaugurations, they have, I'm sure they use that particular one for both places, right?
Well, and many presidents have used a specific Masonic Bible. I think it's of the Church of St. John in Washington. That was an ancient one. I know several presidents have requested that one. Other ones might request another one, but it's interesting. Like when the Bushes were wanting the Masonic Bible for yeah. But still, whether it's that Bible or another Bible, they're still swearing an oath on it, and it's still part of that same system.
Yeah, and I think with Obama, they forgot the Bible or something. I'm trying to remember back to, what was it, 2008, when he was being sworn in, and they had to go run and grab the Bible or something.
Yep.
They forgot to bring it. I was just like, oh my goodness.
Not an important thing to them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for that awesome answer, Gary. And we'll move on to question 2. From Daniel Sullivan. He's asking, are the wheat and chaff parables about the rapture calling out Babylon wrath, Armageddon, or the judgment?
Yeah, the tares, wheat and tares parable and prophecy. It's kind of unique that way. Is used by many and used to usually describe a preconceived conclusion. And I can see how you could take it in all of these different meanings and more that people would use it for. But it has some specific markers in there that should help us in the proper understanding of it. And so the first thing that we need to understand is that, the harvest is an allegory for the end of this world. And that's a destruction by fire. And so it has more of a year of the Lord's wrath application than sort of backdating it, I think. And that the field is described as this world. And if people are looking for the passage, it's Matthew 13, and essentially that's 38 to 40. But you need to also go back to the original details. It's kind of like in the Daniel prophecies, where Daniel sees the vision and then an angel interprets it for him, because he's mystified as to what the heck the vision actually meant. And he writes both of those down. And so you have Jesus who's providing this, and in typically his parables, he did give the answer to it. And this one's prophetic, And so he gives the answer for that as well. And so the tares are the devil's children. And he's the one, the devil, who sows this bad seed. And it's like a black type of seed when you take that back to its original meaning. And again, he's saying that the harvest is the end of the world. And the good seed is the kingdom. So when you look at that word kingdom, very basically your understanding of it would be the world to come, kingdom to come, or angels in heaven already in that kingdom. And of course, the bad seed partly in part would be the fallen angels. And so once we start to look at some of that context that's provided earlier on in starting in about 1329 verses 38 to 41, we get some important details. And in that is the reapers are the angels. So reapers are coming for the harvest. And the reapers are not collecting necessarily people for rapture, because it wouldn't be called loyal angels, but they wouldn't be reapers as they're called. And we're instructed that both the bad seed, the tares, and the wheat are to continue to grow together until the harvest, not to be separated in times past, but in a specific period in the future. And in the time of the harvest, in the time of the year of the Lord's wrath, and to gather the tares, but also gather the wheat into together as well. So there's two different types of gathering that's going on. One for judgment and one for salvation. So, and it's the reapers that gather tares. So there's a specific set of angels for the reapers, and throughout the last 7 years, you could look at the angels that are coming for if they participate in the resurrection sequence, and they probably do to a certain degree, and or for the rapture. You could look at that, but this isn't, that happens before the harvest. And so, like Revelation 19 is the harvest, right? It's the battle of Armageddon. And the reapers gather the tares to be burned in fire. So when we look at what's happening here is this is like a separation of the people who are still alive, who didn't swear an oath to Antichrist, to Satan, did not take the mark of the beast, and did not worship Antichrist or Satan. And the tares represented in the end time are the ones that are going to burn in the lake of fire. And so we see Antichrist and false prophet taken to the lake of fire at the time of Armageddon. We see in Matthew 25 the fallen angels, all who rebelled, all of the Nephilim and Satan, are going to be cast into the lake of fire that was created for that purpose. And you have the lake of fire that is also used at the judgment at the end of the millennium for the last resurrection. But those aren't said to be to burn forever. Same location, but they're not going to receive the same punishment. They're going to receive the second death. Now, I'm not saying that all the evil ones and the terrible ones past may not burn forever. We're just not told that in the book of Revelation, but I think you could probably infer from what Revelation is telling us that there are ones that, if they were worshiping Antichrist and Satan, that are going to burn forever. One would think some of the most horrible ones might burn forever as well. So the angels, the demon spirits, and those who worship Antichrist are the ones that are going to be separated in the end time. So I wouldn't apply this separation of the wheat and tares at the rapture, which, whether you're pre-trib or mid-trib, like as I am, and at the time of the coming out of Babylon, which happens just before the destruction of Babylon, just after the midpoint, just after Antichrist has come to power, and before the destruction of Babylon. So you could look at that as part of that, but it doesn't seem that that is encompassing those events before. It seems to be quite specific that it is encompassing the year of the Lord's wrath when the great harvest takes place. In the book of Revelation, whether it's in chapter 14 or 19, is talking about this harvest as well. And you get many harvest allegories for the end time in the Old Testament as well. So it's one of those allegories that helps you with biblical chronology. So, and because of that, and I like to use those markers for the chronology, I place that more for what happens at Armageddon versus the resurrection sequence of the saints. That would also include Ezekiel 37, or the resurrection of the elect, as it would also include Ezekiel 37. And the time of judgment for Judah and Israel, as Daniel 12 is talking about for Daniel's people. I would separate that out from the harvest, because all of that is happening before the year of the harvest. So, and again, I understand all the reasons why it's used for different time periods and different meanings, and I can see how that fits. But when I get down to the brass tacks of the detail, I go with the chronology markers.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary, for that answer. We'll go on to question 3 from Truth Seeker. If the children of the fallen angels were/are giants, was Cain also a giant if his father was a fallen angel?
Well, if his father was a fallen angel, then he would have to be a giant.
Right.
That's kind of the definition of a Nephilim or a demigod or a Rephaim. So half fallen angel and half human. And so, yes, if his father was a fallen angel, he would have been a giant. The interesting thing about Cain, though, is we're never told in the Bible he's a giant.
Right.
Although the Gnostics say he's a giant. And so, and most of the Gnostics agree that Cain's line is a lineage of giants, and it's a separate giant creation from the giants in Genesis 6. What we are told is Cain is called a man. He's not called a Nephilim. He's not called a mighty one. Or any of the descriptions, he's not called a Rephaim. So in 4:1, he's called a man, and that's Hebrew Ish, which basically means a generic name and I would say a little bit more lowly form than Adam, that's used in specific applications for a male human. So I think that goes with his ostracization, but so you wouldn't use a lower sort of term. You'd lose more of a term that would make him more like a demigod, or a specific term other than Nephilim, because it would be a different creation than at the time of the Nephilim. So it would maybe have a different Hebrew name if you're trying to make a case that's consistent with the biblical MO, what he would be called. And Cain is, from 7014, Cain or Cain, depending on how you want to pronounce that, which is the name of the first child, according to the definition, and or a smith, which was he was a manufacturer of agricultural implements and weapons, not to the same degree in weaponry as the Nephilim, and he was not classified as a royale in any sort of way, other than kind of as the parent, um, the parent for this race that somehow intermingles with giants downstream. And so biblically, we don't get any sort of connection to being a royale or a giant of any sort of form. So to answer the question, yes, if Satan was his father or another fallen angel, then he would be a giant. But we don't get that in the Bible. You could also look at his name as coming from acquired, but if you go through the amount of information that we do get on Cain, everything points to Adam and Eve as being his parents, not Eve and another fallen angel, or Lilith and another fallen angel, or not, sorry, I mean Lilith with Adam, and the many different ways that the polytheists will look at Cain. So, but yeah, the answer would be yes, if that indeed was the case. I just can't, for myself, I don't get there biblically that Cain was a giant. And again, I don't care whether he was or he wasn't. He was evil.
Yeah.
But I just can't get there biblically through the text.
Okay, great answer. Thank you, Gary. Question 4 from Brian Tucker, and we're getting a little close to break here. We have about a little less than 10 minutes. So we'll ask this question from Brian. It's David's mighty men. What do you know about Beriah?
Well, I don't know much about Beriah. I mean, the name does show up in First Chronicles 3:23 as the son of Shemaiah of the Solomon line. But I don't think that's who Brian's trying to refer to. I think he might be, because there's no Beriah in David's mighty men, but there is a Benaiah.
Yes, that sounds more familiar.
Yeah, and Benaiah would be one of David's 3 generals, so very high up. And he was in charge of the Cherethim and the Pelathim. And if you're not familiar with that pronunciation, biblically, in most it's Cherethites and Pelethites. I changed the suffix to "im" because, and I make the case in book 2 that these are giants from the island of Crete that the Philistines intermarried with.
Oh.
And so they were Cretan Aryan mercenaries, as they're understood, right? And so if you're going to be in charge of giants that are bodyguards for David, because some of these were bodyguards for David, and they're going to be fighting for you, you're going to have to be a pretty darn good warrior that isn't going to be intimidated by these giants. So there's got to be something more going on here with Benaiah, which I think is why maybe Brian is sort of asking the question. And so we get a couple of details biblically on him. One is he slew a giant from Egypt. So he's obviously a giant slayer. And that's in 2 Samuel 23 and 1 Chronicles 27. And he also slew blind men of Moab.
Wow.
Which I think are another kind of giant.
Yeah, another hybrid.
Yeah. Oh, and the giant that he slew from Egypt was not as tall as Goliath. He was only 5 cubits tall, so probably about 8 feet 9 inches tall. but also very stout. So we know he was also quite the giant. And so he was a very good warrior. He was son of Jehoiada, son of Kabziel, and the latter was described as a valiant man of Judah. So I think he comes from a warrior lineage. But you know what? He probably wasn't as tall as Saul. One presumes he might have been alive when King Saul was around. I'm deducing this. I don't have anything there biblically. And Saul was taller, a head, neck, and part of the shoulder taller than any other Israelite. So what we do know is even though his lineage are of valiant men, it's not Gibborim as it's being described, but a valiant man. A powerful, strong warrior, but not a Gibborim. And the linemen of Moab and the like men of Gad were understood as Gibborim, as mighty ones. So we don't get a lot of details. I do cover off Benaiah in book 2 in a couple of places, but because there's not a lot of detail on him, I can't go all that deep unless I get into other things that I didn't think I could support biblically. So that's what I find biblically from him, but I think he must have been extraordinary. One, to be the leader, one of the 3 generals, and then to be in charge of these giant mercenaries and bodyguards. And then to have slain obviously several giants and giant-like hybrids he would have had a huge reputation at the time, I think.
Wow. That's interesting. Do you happen to, like, later on in the book, I know you touch on some of David's mighty men a little bit in the first half that I've read so far. I've always wanted to do kind of a deep dive on each one of David's mighty men to kind of just see what's their lineage, like what might they have looked like to be considered mighty men,
Yeah. So, I mean, all of them except for about 3 are like Benaiah, they're Israelites.
Okay.
So you can't make a case. Well, I don't make the case that they're hybrids or anything like that, but you do get a few, like you have a Maacathite or a Maacathim, that's one of the mighty men, and you have Uriah the Hittite, who would be a hybrid as well. And then there's one other one in there that I list in book 2 as well. So the only 3 I picked up that I could actually say were, would have had giant genes to them.
Yeah, because when I imagine these like giant killers, like it's not like the mighty men, if they're like normal sized people, I'm trying to imagine, like Ant-Man, I'm just imagining these small little guys that somehow can slay giants by their speed. I mean, of course, by the power of the Most High. But I'm just imagining they're so small. They're just probably, I don't know. I mean, there's all these different tactics that Most High would use, like the Hornet or different things to paralyze them, or just to they chop their ankles off because they're quite a bit smaller than them. I'm just trying to imagine what that looked like.
Yeah, I know. It's like you're fighting, and and as you say, it seems to be different than in the time of the Exodus, where you had the angel of the Lord, you had the Ark of the Covenant, and you had these hornets going out to discombobulate the giants so they could just walk up and lop their heads off, right? You're going to take them out at the knees first and then take the head off. We don't get any of that. David. Yeah. So I think you might make a case that just as some of the patriarchs would have been receiving additional sort of strength from God, I would think maybe a lot of David's mighty men might have had been sort of reinforced. Again, my speculation, to be able to be taking on. I mean, this Philistine nation was just loaded with giants, and it was the most powerful nation of that era. And it's a nation that Joshua didn't take on. So David is the one who finishes the Philistines, and the Philistines, torture Israel, so to speak, and oppress them throughout the age of the judges. And King Saul doesn't defeat them. It takes David to come along with his mighty men. So things sort of indicate there's more going on there, but more from being, I think, given additional strength through whatever means. And again, we're not told whether it's the Holy Spirit or whatever is providing that strength. We're not even told they're given that extra strength. But
Right,
one
right.
deduces they must have had some, because they were just absolutely a force to be reckoned with. They
No,
could
they're
not be
brutal.
defeated. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on that note, we are at break now. So we will see everybody after break. Go get something to drink, eat. Thank you so much, Gary. We'll see you guys in a few minutes.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world. As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet, not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Lisa George, your host, and we are in the middle of another awesome Ask Me Anything with author and researcher, speaker, Bible scholar, Gary Wayne. And I would like to encourage you, if anyone has not read or purchased either one of his amazing books, I would definitely recommend doing so. Your mind will continually be blown with each chapter. As mine has been. And I was just talking to Brother Gary this first hour that I am a little bit more than halfway through his second book. I read through his first book so many times just because I was so excited to read it. I raced through it and then realized I missed so much just because I read it way too fast. So I went back, and then 6 more times later, now I have a really good, pretty good grasp, I think, of the first book. And so the second book is it's amazing. I thought, how can things get any better? He's covered so much material in the first book, but you will not be disappointed with book 2. So, Brother Gary, if you'd like to share your website where people could order your book again, and then we'll get into the questions.
Sure. And thank you for the kind words on my book, and glad you're enjoying it. And yeah, I was concerned, in writing it. And, I said I would never write a sequel because I didn't want to be redundant. So
That's what I was kind of expecting a little bit of that, but it's not at all. Like, it's totally different material. I mean, like, to me, the second book is focusing more on exactly what is in the Bible, as backed up by other sources, of course, but focus especially on like the wars, the Nephilim and the Rephaim, especially in the Bible. Whereas the first one was more like a comprehensive type of overview of the secret societies and prophecy. But does that sound like an okay summary I did there?
Yeah, it's written from 2 different perspectives. So, book 1 was how the Bible intersects with the worldwide testimony of prehistory and history, and the 2 different versions of the end time. And so, and I let the polytheist forces and seculars speak in their own words there, so that it wouldn't be, mistranslated or said to be manipulated. And book 2, even though it's covering similar material, it's more heavily weighted to the post-Diluvian epoch, versus a lot is in the antediluvian epoch in book 1. But it's how the world intersects to the biblical chronology. And in book 1, I use secular chronology and dating. In book 2, I use biblical chronology and resolve, and for me, I can go back and forth between the 2. I just have to remember there's about 600 years difference in the 2 chronologies. But once you accept biblical chronology, all the contradictions disappear. So,
Right.
And it makes so you can start to mesh up things in different countries that people struggle with because they're using the secular chronology. So, yeah, so that's the difference in the books. And so there's some overlap, and I use references from book 1, but it is material for the most part that's not presented in book 1, that's used in book 2, and is still talking about our history, but in a completely different way and perspective than book 1 was. So it's unique, and it's not redundant if you want more information and more clarity only from a Christian perspective.
Right. Thank you so much for all that, Gary. And Sherry and Tammy, the moderators in the chat, are putting up all kinds of links. So if you would like to order books, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. Gary was describing that during the first hour, how if you'd like a signed copy of his book, you go to Genesis6conspiracy.com that Tammy put up there. If you just want to order it from Amazon, Sherry put the link up for that. And there's other, he described during the first hour that he's got audios that are in the process and completed. And so there's all kinds of ways that you can listen to or read his material, whatever you prefer. So go ahead and check those out in the live chat. Speaking of other countries, let's get into question number 5 here from Purple Pink. She is asking, what is particular to the area of Indo-Aryan culture and geography antediluvian times for why they are so revered for their writings and tech for Nazis and theosophy?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So if you look at whether it's National Socialists in the Nazi movement and their recreated sort of history, they're tied themselves back into theosophical history and antediluvian history, and which also would include post-diluvian history. And so both of them are talking about Indo-Aryans, and they looked at Indo-Aryans before the flood. And Indo-Aryans are before and after the flood, as we get that terminology that comes down to us from polytheists and seculars who answers to the polytheists. Many of them don't know they do, but they still do. So that's the first thing we need to remember, is that Indo-Aryans were before the flood and after the flood. And they're also known as Indo-Europeans. Those words are interchangeable. And so their language is the same language. And their language, one deduces, comes from the fallen angels. Because there's a similarity before and after the flood. There's some significant changes after the flood, but still there's a connection there. And there's 4 to 5 races, according to those sources, of Indo-Aryans or Indo-Europeans, and not just from one area. They're from all over the world. So typically, when you get into theosophy, for the most part, and the Nazis, they're dealing with more Western civilizations and the antediluvian civilizations. So theosophy is more concerned with Atlantis, although it does include Mu, and you could also include one, whether it's got any more credibility to it as one of those 7 nations, or as some of the polytheist reasoning is, it was the original parent religion called Lemuria. So typically theosophy would be dealing with the island of Atlantis, and they're just, and that's why the Greek mythology history really fits in well with the theosophical one when you're looking at trying to get cross references and more details. Now, Hitler's group, they looked at Indo-Aryans as well, but their empire is called Thule, Thule, or Tula. You could, if you ever hear the name Tula and you don't see the spelling, it's spelled Thule, but that pronunciation is Tula, where the H is silent, and it doesn't make the E silent, just because it makes the U long. So Tula is the other term for it, and that is like the Norse or the Odin accounting of a place like Atlantis. Now, some people say no, it was more like Asgard, but Tula is the one that the Nazis used, and that was also the name of one of their major secret societies. Wow. So in these versions, in terms of the commonality, is it's the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale-skinned Indo-Aryans that the Nazis were more interested in as part of the Tuatha De Danann, which is another name for Indo-Aryans that were both before and after the flood. The Sidhe, or the She, or the Seed, as some people, and many other names, a tribe of the assembly of Datanu is the same thing as the Tuatha De Danann. They're also known as the Tuatha Danu, or the tribe of Danu. Many different names. These are the Titans, just as the T and the D are interchangeable in its pronunciation throughout many of the ancient worlds, which is why Dedan, Titan, and Datan are all the same group of people. These are Indo-Aryan, and in the Ugaritic text, they're Rephaim after the flood, and these would be Nephilim before the flood. So that assembly of Datanu is recorded in the Ugaritic text, and they're created by Baal and Anat after the flood, versus giants created by El, the parent god of Baal, and Ashtaroth before the flood. Again, important to understand the chronology and the two different giant groups, even though polytheism meshes them together because they look and lean on survivability as well as some second recreations, not as predominant, but for the most part, survival somehow, some way. So the Nazis in their Reichschurch, in their Aryan, Pan-Aryan religion, in their Volkisch ideology that they created, they looked at being descendants of these blonde-haired, blue-eyed giants. So obviously they're looking at a survival story versus a second incursion story in that sort of end. But both of these were not only a more pure race, not only a more larger race, as in giants, that in their theology, in the Nazi theology, and in the theosophical theology, is that over time they were degraded through intermarriage with humans down to a smaller size. But this is what they're trying to recreate. Both the Nazis and Theosophy are trying to create the new man. They're trying to create the new Nephilim. And that they thought that if you could figure out how to recreate the purity of the vril or that was in the blood, you could create the giants. Or if you could backwards engineer the DNA back to its original nature, then you could create the giants. And the Nazis, in the meantime, were trying to select that DNA down and just produce blonde hair, blue-eyed, pale skin Germans to try and create the new man that way until they could get the other technology in place. In the theosophical, Gnostic, and New Age belief, it's all the same religion, belief system is that they believe that you can create through the knowledge these new giants, and or you can evolve into godhood to your original state, as I understand what they're trying to do. So again, somehow having new giants being recreated going forward in their new age of Atlantis. And so not only were they enamored with their physical attributes, they were enamored with their technology. And that's why both are a knowledge cult as well, and that they want to be able to recreate the same level of technology that was before the flood. And I don't get this biblically, I get this through speculation and deducing, is that I think that through the details that we get, and even scripturally through the details of this level of violence that was going on, caused by the giants, and that the corruption of the earth that's described in Genesis 6 and 7, Hebrew word chakath, meaning perverted, decayed, destroyed, words like that, that something changed in all of the DNA in both the animals and in the humans and in the plant genomes, and that also required some DNA manipulation capability, which suggests a high level of technology, along with these antediluvian buildings that they did with sacred geometry, celestial alignments, earth ratios, connections and numerical geometry for those types of architecture around the world, from pyramids, temples, and joints on masonry we can't do, and weights of rocks that we can't do, and a technology to work those rocks. None of that they had, and that they had the ability to destroy the world by fire with this technology, which was angelic technology. And again, my speculation on that technology, because we don't get that. But what we do know is when that knowledge is somehow resurfacing at Babel in Genesis 11, is that as acting as one people in one language, and where that knowledge that we're not told comes from to build Babel City and Babel Tower, which in the polytheist versions, they're building technology at Babel to go interdimensionally so that Nimrod could go into the other world to free the parent gods and probably the offspring gods who are already in prison for their crimes, and to go into heaven and do battle with God and his angels. So there's a technology in the polytheist side that was there, and seemingly is part of what is being alluded to in the building of Babel City and Babel Tower, and that their capability going forward would be with that knowledge. Nothing would be prevented. So this is the knowledge that was found and given to Nimrod, that was antediluvian knowledge, and this knowledge could destroy the world by fire.
Wow.
But destruction by fire is saved for the end time. And I think that's why either God brought the flood or permitted the flood to come, so that there would be an intercession, so that all the names in the book of life could be fulfilled that were written in there from before creation. And I think that's why there was an intercession at Babel with the confusion of languages again, so that that could play out. So that's what they're after. They're after that knowledge. They want to recreate the Indo-Aryan giant rule. They want to create the Nephilim world order. That's why, and that's why they want world government, and they want that Babel religion, which is the religion of Enoch, son of Cain, which is the Indo-Aryan religion. It's Zoroastrianism. It's the, as we see it surface as the first religion after the flood. It's the same religion that started in with the other branch of Aryans that went into the Indus Valley. And so that's what they're trying to recreate in this new Atlantis. And we saw that in Hitler's self-proclaimed Messiah type status as a Fuhrer, who promising a Third Reich or 1,000-year Reich, which is a counterfeit millennium. So when you hear about the millennium of the New Age, that's the same belief system. They're just coming at it from different sort of sects of that polytheist religion.
Yeah, that reminds me, I have a lot of thoughts on what you were just saying, but one of them is, the technology, like what you mentioned before, that they've had the power, or they've figured out how to destroy the world by fire. It seems like that might relate to like direct energy weapons today, like what happened on Maui last year. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that that was not a forest fire that was just started randomly. Like, there's a ton of evidence that they do have the technology to start fires kind of covertly and make it seem like it was a natural occurrence. And I believe that, yeah, I mean, I don't think that they've lost the technology by any means, but they're definitely building to whatever they're planning for the tribulation.
Well, and the false prophet is going to be bringing fire down from heaven, just as Elijah did. Now, Elijah does that through God. But
Right.
the counterfeit has to be the technology that is being provided, that false prophet is going to be able to do that. So we're just catching up to that technology now, so that they can make a plausible case to fight against the God of the Bible, that, the rebels will have a chance to win. But it's
Right.
it's what they've been trying to do ever since the Adamites were created. They want them destroyed from the face of the earth so that they wouldn't reach their destiny. Now it's just more spite or the fallen angels have just misled the followers, because the angels already know after the resurrection that their fate was sealed.
Yeah.
And so they're just trying to destroy as many as they can at this point in time through the visible ones on this earth. But I think the visible ones actually believe, because they're being lied to from the fallen angels that they worship, that they actually could win.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know like there's certain people that are part of the Masonic thing. Like I wanted to quote this astrophysicist. I'm sure people in the chat, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Don Pettit, famous NASA astrophysicist, where they asked, oh, well, how come we haven't returned to the moon since 60 something? And he said, oh, well, we lost that technology a long time ago. And it's like, no, I'm sure that they didn't lose any technology. That if anything, they're building more to create whatever they're planning for the last days here.
Yeah, and if they did go to the moon, that was very low tech technology that they were using.
Oh my goodness. We can't even get a cell phone signal, and they have Nixon talking on like a landline to somebody on the moon. Like, come on. Okay. Thank you for that answer, Gary. Another question, number 6 here from Tim S. Is evangelical Christian Zionism part of dispensational theology? Does the modern-day Israel, established in 1948, fulfill prophecy?
I'll start with the latter, and then work my way back on this. I think the establishment of Israel in 1948 and its Declaration of Independence in 1947 actually does fulfill prophecy. I'm not saying that God brought that about. I'm just saying people of the southern kingdom of Judah, are in the covenant land in the end time. And they're only told that they're going to come back once before the second Exodus of all Israel and Judah in the end time. So they're in possession of Jerusalem, and they're in possession of parts of the covenant land, let's say in passages like Ezekiel 38 and 39. But in all the end time prophecy, they have possession of Jerusalem to a certain point in the end times. So I think that is a fulfillment of prophecy. And we're not told how that happens. We're only told that the southern kingdom would be dispersed in the time of Rome, just as they were prophesied for violating the covenant to go into exile into Babylon. And just as Israel was lost into the nations of the world till the end time, until the time of the second Exodus, Judah is still visible, Israel is lost. So yes, I think that's a fulfillment of prophecy. And so it doesn't matter whether or not the state that was created in Zionism was, funded by, Western banks, funded by the Rothschilds, funded by secret societies, or mystical or polytheist Jewish people. It doesn't matter, because in prophecies, they're there in the end times. So, and we know that Jesus called the generation of his coming the fig tree generation, and that he killed that fig tree just before he went into the temple and just before he gave his oration of the end time, because that fig tree wasn't bearing any fruit. The fig tree in the Old Testament is the southern kingdom. The vine is the northern kingdom. And so when you see that fig tree in bloom, this is the fig tree generation. And so I think that's part of prophetic fulfillment. We're just not told really how that would come about. And I think God is letting the spurious forces, go to certain positions to bring about this end time, because they want that rendezvous. So having said that, when we look at evangelical Christian Zionism, it's a political and religious ideology, and it includes, Israel's return to the Holy Land. And it's understood that Israel returning to the covenant land, the Holy Land, is a prerequisite in that belief system for the second coming of Jesus. And this is essentially Calvinist ideology from the 1500s. And I'm not saying I'm for or against it. I mean, most of what I said is there I would be for, and I'm just doing some highlights here to get to dispensational theology. And so in that, for people who aren't aware of it, there are different ages of dispensations. Generally understood as 3 different ages of dispensations where there's interaction and periods of God and Israel and humans. So, and there's a distinction in that dispensation theology between Israel and the church. And a distinction between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that they shouldn't necessarily be confused, that they should be considered, but they shouldn't necessarily be confused, and that the Old Testament should be understood prophetically, literally. And so all of that seems to fit together, at least on the whole, that there's a similarity, but within dispensationalism and within the evangelical Christian Zionism, there is different sects to that, and their chronologies sort of split into different groups. So yes, you can make an
Sounds like you have a little friend. Yeah, a little friend there helping you research.
Yes, he's got a few points he wants to add, and he wants to make sure it gets in. And
you don't ask me anything for him next.
Yeah. So I would say there's a directional thing that's similar there, but I wouldn't call them the same. But again, I mean, for people who, there's a lot of Christians out there who believe that the church replaced Israel. And so that all of the prophecies promised to Israel would go to the church. I don't subscribe to that because biblically I can't get there because of contradictions. But I understand that understanding. And I would encourage people, though, to understand that there is a distinction between the church, and there is a distinction between Israel, and there is a distinction between Judah. And Judah and Israel will be brought back together, as Ezekiel 37 talks about, particularly into one stick and one country under King David. Again, in the time of that second Exodus in the last 3.5 years, that you shouldn't confuse prophecies promised into the Holy Covenant to Israel that God said he would never forget, and that he would awaken Israel and call them by name and bring them back in the end time, even though they violated the Holy Covenant. And Romans 11, given by Paul, is a great read, and it is trying to encourage Christians not to be hubris in their approach. Yes, the saints have a major role, but we are the branches grafted in.
Mm-hmm.
And that Israel's restoration is prophesied. And Paul goes on to say they have a hardening of the heart so the Gentiles can be brought in.
Yeah.
And so there is going to be, and the church is a wild olive tree that's grafted in, which is one of those things I want to really get into in sort of detail, say, what the heck is this olive tree coming into play? And throughout the Bible, I'm going to try and work that into book 3. So,
that'll be good. That'll be a good one.
So, yes, they're similar, but they're not the same. But there's a lot of things in there I would underscore. But where they all tend to part is they have preconceived conclusions, and then they have to reinvent what the Bible says, they have to reinvent what Jesus said, and they have to ignore inconvenient passages. So that gets problematic in some of the different variations, even within those groups.
Okay, yeah, great answer. That's kind of a hot topic today. It just seems like there's you can't ignore what Scripture says about prophecy with Israel and the grafted in part, and certain things have to come to pass with those who maybe are just discovering that they're part of the lost tribes of Israel, for example. You cannot ignore some of these things here. Gary, I have a question I'd like to ask.
Let me
you.
just
Oh no,
let
go
me
ahead.
just sort of add on to that. And
Yes.
a lot of people think that there's no way that can happen because they don't, the Jewish people don't accept the Messiah.
Right.
And what they forget is that hardening of the heart is there for a purpose, but in the end time, and there's going to be a judgment, and they have a separate judgment at a separate time, as Ezekiel 37 talks about and Daniel 12 talks about. But what's interesting, though, is for them to be forgiven, they're going to have to accept Jesus as their Messiah.
Right.
And that happens in the last 3.5 years.
Wow. That's cool. That's cool. A cool thing to look for. There's all these things. Truly, I believe that we are in the fig tree generation now. What is your take? I think are you on board with that, Gary, or you think that there's still some time left?
Oh, I definitely think we're in the fig tree generation. The issue gets to be is when does it start? Is it 1947 or 1948? And I think probably not then. I think probably Jerusalem is the real key. And remember, Jesus killed the fig tree while in Jerusalem and presented his end time chronology in Jerusalem. And that for the end time to be there, particularly the last 7 years, but one would presume leading up to the last 7 years, the southern kingdom would have to be in control of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem's kind of the epicenter for end time prophecy.
Yes, totally.
With Judah. And so I would say if there is a startup, then I would probably suggest the taking of Jerusalem in 1967. The problem gets to be is how long is a generation?
Right.
So in the books of Exodus and Leviticus, you have the 40 years in the wilderness. And that's called a generation.
Yeah.
So if that was 1967, I mean, that gets you to about 2017 or so, if I did them. And so we would be sort of in that period right now. And a lot of the Jewish prophecy suggests we would be in the Messianic period. But again, there's no specification of how long that period is. But we also get 70 years in the book of Psalms.
Yeah, I was going to mention it's 40 and 70. I think I remember hearing some pastors teaching on that.
So if that's the case, then we're looking probably into the 2030s to the 2040s, right? So, so things would still have to happen quickly for that to happen. But there's another time frame that we need to consider, particularly in conjunction with the days of Noah, which follows immediately after as an overarching sign after the fig tree generation. And the days of Noah could be also understood as the generation of Noah. Now, I'm not saying the generation would be 650 years, but what we do know within Noah's generation, and it's going to be like the days of Noah, we have all the other details that I won't go into, but one important detail is Genesis 6:3, where life is limited to 120 years.
Right.
And so we have to factor that one in, that's a possibility as well. And then after putting all that on the table, then it doesn't have to be the full generation.
Yes.
Like to the exact number would happen in that generation.
Within it.
Yeah. So that's why it gets a little bit, you have to be careful on the chronology and not get ahead of saying where we are, because if you're literally saying You know, we're in the trumpets. Well, geez, what happened to the seals? And how did,
Yeah.
you know?
You can't skip over all that stuff. You have to, has to be in order. Okay. Wow. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of that, Gary. That is the end of our questions that we got from last month. I have a question for you, and then are you okay to answer a couple of the questions that came in earlier today? Like during the first
Absolutely.
half? Okay,
Absolutely.
let's do that. So my question is, as I'm reading through your second book, I wanted to see what are your thoughts about the because I'm reading I was reading the chapter about the Midianites and just tracing that. I had to remind myself who this group of people were and where they come from. And they actually, and you say too in your book that they're from Abraham and Keturah. What are your thoughts about the Legends of the Jews and the Book of Joshua claiming that Hagar is actually Keturah, like just a different name, the mother of Abraham's offspring, like the Midianites after Sarah passed away?
I'm not familiar with that, but there's a lot of replacement ideology that's out there. I think Hagar is Egyptian as what it said in
Right, the princess.
Yeah, and that's a royal bloodline in itself, right, from the pharaohs.
Yes. Yes.
But I wouldn't override scripture and say, well, Hagar and Keturah are the same individuals, because we get the genealogies of each. So I would tend to say, well, that's an interesting thought. I don't know why you'd want to make that case. But certainly through Ishmael and Hagar, and certainly through Keturah and Abraham, and of course Hagar being a consort of Abraham, you create rivals and rival peoples for the inheritance of Abraham.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sorry. No,
go
just
ahead.
For reference, as soon as you're done with that thought, I'll read to you just this paragraph from Legends of the Jews so you can see what I'm talking about.
Sure. And I'll just finish by saying, so that was at play in ancient history to try and wipe Israel from the face of the earth.
Yeah.
Right? And also included by the Amalekites through Timnah and Eliphaz, son of Esau, who lost his birthright, who lost the blessings and the Messianic promise. And through Israelite law, if you were to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, you would inherit all of that. So there's been that sort of rival and feud going on all throughout history. And one should be prepared for those kinds of things to resurface in the end time again.
Yeah, all the different rivals with all the different Rephaim tribes, right?
Yep.
So I don't have maybe Sherry's so good at looking this stuff up. Maybe Sherry, if you have a chance, you could look in the book of Joshua and see if you could find the scripture. I can quote it because it says it's something to the effect where it says, and then Abraham took Keturah to wife, and then it just says in parentheses, I believe it says the same also is Hagar in the book of Joshua, and then that's all you get there. But in the Legends of the Jews, in the last years of Abraham, this is in book 1 of the Legends of the Jews, it says, Rebekah first saw Isaac as he was coming from the way of Be'er Laharoi, the dwelling place of Hagar, whither he had gone after the death of his mother for the purpose of reuniting his father with Hagar, or as she is also called, Keturah. Hagar bore him 6 sons, who, however, did scant honor to their father, for they were all idolaters. Abraham, therefore, during his own lifetime, sent them away from the presence of Isaac, that they might not be singed by Isaac's flame, and gave them the instruction to journey eastward as far as possible. There he built a city for them, surrounded by an iron wall. I mean, there's all kinds of details about the city and how basically in the Bible he sent them away, and that was it. But I just think it's kind of interesting. It goes on to describe all the different children of Abraham and Keturah, and the different tribes they created, like the Midianites. So just to give you a reference of where I was getting that from.
Sure, and it's interesting. But again, I sort of, like as I said, I go back to what happens in the Bible. And some of the things that get confused over times is that there are, and I've talked about this a lot, and I covered it off in book 1, in book 2, and really sort of underscore it, that there are patronymic names that come down through history. Like,
Yes.
and there are also matronymic names like Maka that come down through history, and they resurface. And so there were popular names and of bloodlines. And so it's easy to sort of confuse some of those names. Like Nama is another one of those ones where every time somebody sees a name Nama, they apply it to
offspring of Cain.
Of Lamech, in the Cain line. And that's that name would have been very, very much named after she became famous for what she did within those polytheist religions. So that would become a matronymic title that's passed down. So we have to be careful of that. And so that's why I always look, well, that's interesting, because you get like names of Noah's wife as Nama, for example.
Right.
And I go, but we don't get told the name in the Bible. So I would be very careful with that. And I would be very careful with Keturah being Hagar. And then also with, not only did kings and powerful people have multiple names and multiple titles, as with Moses' father-in-law, and I cover this off in detail. How many? And they think he had up to 7 different names.
Yes, Jethro, Reuel,
Hobab. Yeah. So, of the powerful matriarchs, they had multiple names and titles as well. So they might have a different name for a different authority. Or a different position. And so that would be done in the polytheist sort of ideology, for the most part, in terms of how that would relate within that polytheist sort of religion. So, and I'm not saying Jethro was a polytheist. All I'm just saying is that because a lot of the things that were done with the monotheists were also done with the polytheists, but we see more of it in the polytheist side.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I had some questions pop up. I thought I'd ask you, but we could go into the first couple questions that were submitted here. We have about 15, maybe about 12 minutes left. Maybe you could get at least this first question from Ashley Allen. She's asking, why does God allow Satan to return for a short season?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, I like that question.
It is. And what's even more surprising is after 1,000-year reign of the Word of God, the Jehovah of the Elohim, Satan gets out, and in a very short period of time, you have all of these people around the world that are gathering to do war against Jerusalem and the Word of God. So this is a lesson for humanity, I think, and it's letting things play out. And so, you had, before the Adamites, you had the fallen angels created immortal and were intimate with God, and how powerful and how knowledgeable and how good, yet up to a third rebelled. Then you create Adam and Eve, and they're going to be the resolution to the angelic rebellion. But Adam and Eve don't even get out of Eden before they stumble. And then but God continues with the same sort of game plan to make sure all the names of the book of life have that opportunity, and things are playing out through free choice. And so humans have to choose God with very little knowledge and created mortal. And that's why we're going to be raised to a higher level. But the story's not over with the resurrection sequence for the saints. There's the millennium. where humans are going to survive into that, and one presumes not all of them are still going to accept the word of God, whether they do that visibly or not during their lifetime, but certainly there's going to be enough humans to mount this war. This is to show that, I think, my speculation, because we're not told why that happens biblically, I think that it's to make sure humans raised into immortality are going to remain humble, because now they're immortal, and humans are and they're going to be shown, and just as the people in the millennium are going to be shown that intimate knowledge of God, that people would still rebel, and that's what Satan is there to do. And so humanity, even after the first set of resurrections, there's another lesson to be played out as we prepare for eternity. And I think that's why it has to be covered off. It's one of those details to show that even though we're created lower than angels and now raised a little higher than angels, we're no different than the angels.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, because the angels were created to be immortal. So, after humans become immortal after judgment and that whole 9 yards happens, that would make sense that they need something to keep them humble. That's a great answer. Thank you, Gary. I really enjoyed that question. Thank you, Ashley. I think we have time for one more question. We have about 10 minutes now. This is from Daniel Sullivan. He's asking about Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Where he says, let's see. I'm trying to read my own handwriting here. Hold on just a second. Actually, let me go back. I'm gonna relook at that question, Daniel, and let's go to another question that came in from Ashley Allen. She says, does Michael stop protecting us all at once or little by little? I'm not sure what the reference is for that.
Yeah, I think where she might be getting there is and I call it Michael sitting down. Because Michael, in the time of Daniel, is shown to be fighting against the beast empires. He's fighting Persia, and then he's going to fight against Greece. And he's the one who protects Daniel's people. And because we're grafted in, he would be fighting for us as well. And so he prevents the beast empire, doesn't prevent the beast empires from coming to power, he prevents Antichrist from taking over in that beast empire. And I think that when we see Daniel depicted in, Michael depicted in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, when it says Michael stands up, that means he was sitting. And so he was obviously not protecting, my speculation, and that's when Antichrist rises, when he pauses there for that short period of time. And that permits Antichrist to come to power because the Seventh Empire has already come to power. And then in Revelation 17, the 10 kings in the hour, in that hour, give their power to Antichrist. And it's the same hour that he's going to destroy Babylon in. And this is also the same hour of our time of temptation or trial that's talked about earlier in Revelation 3. So I think that's that pause. It's when he stops protecting. But he doesn't protect us from Babylon. He protects us from the real woe that's coming with Antichrist, with the third woe, which includes Satan and all of his fallen angels being on earth, being cast down, and includes Antichrist coming to power, and includes the destruction of Babylon and then being replaced with the mark of the beast and the religion of the Antichrist that is a different religion, as Daniel 11 describes.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Gary. That was so good, like right off the top of your head there. Okay, and I figured out my handwriting for Daniel's question. He's asking about Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Who is in our image when God made man in his image? And he said, like, the polytheists like to mess with this question with believers.
Well, you have to look at I don't have it in front of me. I'm not sure I can get to it. You have to be careful of the words that are inserted there, or the definition of the words. So why don't we save that one, put it on the list for next month, and I'll go through the Hebrew on that and the meanings, and it's listed. So the short answer is Elohim can be understood as singular for El Elyon, or it can include the three. So if you're going in our image, people will say, well, that's talking about the angels and the creation, but we're in the image of the Elohim, or three-part nature. So in terms of our spirit. So it doesn't matter how, doesn't really matter that, what the language actually is there. It's just, you have to understand that you have the spirit involved, shown in Genesis 1:2. Hovering over the waters, you have God there when he speaks. And Amar is the word speak, or the word of God. And that's who's there for our creation.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And
then you get Jehovah Elohim introduced to us as Jehovah of the Elohim, or Lord God, in Genesis 2. And it's going to be Jehovah who does the major interaction with the Adamites and with the Israelites.
Oh, great answer. Thank you so much, Gary. I think we might have time for one more quick question. Let's see. This is from Michael Fisher. He's asking, do you believe that the U.S. is Babylon in Revelation, or do you believe they will rebuild the actual Babylon in Iraq?
Doesn't have to be either, and likely neither.
None of the above.
So the first thing to remember is that Babylon has four major components. One being, it's a city, and it's said to be a city 9 times in the book of Revelation. So if you wanted to pick a city in the U.S., you could. I still would disagree with the U.S. as having the city for Babylon, but I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. And yeah, Babylon in its original state would be thought to be considered a good location, right, of the ancient city of Babylon. But if I was going to pick a city, it wouldn't be Babylon City there, it would be Babel City as being rebuilt, because Babel is the root Hebrew word for Babylon. And Babel is the religion of the end time. But I would place Babylon on the 7 hills, and the 7 ancient hills that were well known in the time of John, and that Rome was also known allegorically and defined allegorically for Babylon in Greek in the concordance as an allegory for Rome, and said to be Rome by Peter as well in his writings. And I have several chapters in book 2 on this, so I would encourage people to look deeper on that. I think Constantinople would be a closer one with the 7 hills, and part of the old Roman Empire, but I still go to the ancient 7 hills, and Palatine Hill and Vaticanus Hill being a branch of Palatine Hill, and the Sibylline temple there that was understood in the ancient time as the city of Satan. It's just everything points in that direction. We'll have to wait and see, but it's also a geopolitical organization. We have to consider that. It's also a universal religion, and it's also an economic organization. So there's all of those components that are involved.
Wow, great answer again. Thank you so much, Gary. You're such a wealth of knowledge. Everyone is just so impressed. All in the comments throughout, there's a wow. You just your brain is just amazing. Do you think? Should I ask one more question? We have about 2 minutes. What do you think?
Yep, we'll try.
Okay, let's try. This is from Anthony. He's asking, how can John, the one that was on Patmos, Be our companion in tribulation when the resurrection happens after the tribulation, from Revelation 1, verse 9.
You better run that question by me again. Sounds complicated.
I'm a little confused. He said, how can
Yeah.
John, this is the disciple John, not John the Baptist, be our companion in tribulation? I'm not sure where that's coming from. When the resurrection happens after the tribulation. And he's taking that from Revelation chapter 1, verse 9.
Well, he is a companion in tribulation because he undergoes tribulation at that time.
Yeah.
And he goes and he's punished. He goes on to Patmos, and the early church goes through tribulation. But it's not talking about the tribulation of the end time. And he's not raptured at that time either, because after he's in spirit and has the vision, he delivers the letters to the seven churches, and he dies. There's a record of his death. So, but he does receive tribulation, and the seven churches. Not all of those details in those letters are fulfilled in the time of those churches. So
And
it's
I'm
like
sorry
a dual prophecy as well.
Sorry to stop you, Gary, but the music's coming on. We're at the end of the show. Great questions, everybody. Thank you for all your amazing answers, Gary. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month. Same time, same place. Shalom.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
This broadcast, we appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.